Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's event, APAP's ArtsForward Monthly Reopening Webinar. My name is Willie Santiago, and I am the Manager of Programs and Resources at the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. I use he, they pronouns, and I am a fair-skinned Hispanic person assigned male at birth with short, brown, wavy hair, brown eyes, and I am wearing a purple collared shirt with a gray cardigan. APAP is located in our nation's capital of Washington, D.C., on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway and the Anacostan people, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I would like to pay my respect to the Piscataway and the Anacostan elders, both past and present. Closed captioning will appear automatically on your screen. If you would like to disable the chat transcript, please click More on the bottom of the Zoom window and click Hide Subtitle. We are joined today by ASL interpreters from Purple, Melanie Gardner and Jessica Tucker, and APAP staff, JG Decker, who will be assisting with tech for today's webinar, as well as Jenny Thomas, who will be helping us with Q&A towards the end. Participants on today's webinar will have the opportunity to ask questions and provide comments using the Q&A and chat functions. If you have questions, we ask that you please submit them using the Q&A box. Joining us today to introduce the session and our speakers is President and CEO, Lisa Richards-Toney.
Thank you, Willie. Good day, everyone. A pleasure to see you. Thank you for being here. I'm Lisa Richards-Toney, President and CEO of APAP. I'm an African-American woman with a black and gray jacket and a greenish headband and a background that moves. So pardon that. Let's get right to it. So, as you know, APAP is your go-to resource, and we're very proud of that. And thank you for supporting us. Your go-to resource for connections and resources that you need to build your career as a performing arts professional in the presenting, touring, booking field. We're moving the arts forward, and we're very excited for that. Right now, many in our field are still recovering from the impacts of the pandemic. And for that reason, APAP is offering flexible, no barriers membership through June 2022, so we still have time. If you're interested in joining APAP and learning more about our flexible membership dues, contact us at info@apap365.org. On to today's session. Today's session is part of our Arts Forward program initiative made possible with generous support from the Mellon Foundation. APAP's Arts Forward program supports the presenting, touring, and field's safe, vibrant, and equitable reopening and recovery as presenters, artists, and audiences reconnect, tours resume, and venues reopen. As part of Arts Forward, on February 9th, 2022, APAP launched the APAP ArtsForward Reopening Survey with research partner AMS Planning and Research. The important 8-month-long initiative will gather invaluable longitudinal data from performing arts presenters, venues, agents and managers, producers, and artists, and track field-wide trends in reopening and resuming programming, booking, and touring activity. The resulting report will provide the industry with national and regional data to inform decision-making as presenters, producers, artists, and audiences reconnect, work resumes, tours restart, and venues reopen with full attendance capacity. Today, we'll be learning findings from the second deployment of the reopening survey, which was administered to artists, agents, and managers. APAP and AMS Planning and Research will be hosting a series of monthly Arts Forward Reopening Survey update webinars to report on findings from each month's survey to the field. We will run this survey until September, and we will deploy the survey to different facets of our sector every other month. I want to express our deep gratitude to the Mellon Foundation for their support and our appreciation to AMS Planning and Research for their partnership. Today, we are joined by Stephen Wolf, Principal of AMS Planning and Research, and Christian Auden, Project Manager at AMS who will lead us through the findings. Stephen and Christian, welcome.
Lisa, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be involved in this continuing work with APAP. And we really appreciate your support and your engagement of Mellon. Just want to shout out right at the top here for Jesse. Thank you for doing the heavy work for us as we're going forward as our ASL interpreter. I'm Steve Wolf. I'm the principal of AMS Planning and Research. I'm a white male, graying hair, glasses, a blue sweater. I'm calling you today from excuse me, an airport lounge in Orlando, Florida, where the Seminole tribe and the Miccosukee tribe were here. We respect and honor their elders, their traditions, and their leaders today. I unfortunately am at the whims of airlines that chose not to fly yesterday. So if you hear the background music, I apologize for that. Ask my colleague Christian to introduce himself, and then we'll move into the plan for today.
Thanks, Stephen. My name is Christian. I'm, as Lisa mentioned, a project manager with AMS Planning and Research. I am a white male with brown hair. I'm wearing a button-down shirt and a vest, a blue vest, and I'm really happy to be with everybody here. So I'll turn it back to Stephen.
Thanks, Christian. So let me just give you a little bit more background than Lisa did on the study. As she mentioned, we are working on parallel paths, interest in gathering data from agents, artists, and artist managers, and in a separate track, venues and presenters. The venues and presenters first survey was last month. We're reporting on, if you will, the baseline data for artists and agents and managers this month, and that will rotate so that there are 4 administrations of each. And the reason we're doing that in that fashion is we really want to see the arc of change as the field returns and reopens, and how things are evolving. What that also means is that for today, we're sharing with you baseline data. So there aren't any great ahas today. There's a lot of information that we're going to try to share. As Lisa mentioned, and just to reiterate, the goal here is to help the sector be more effective as we go forward. And working with APAP, we've been talking for many months through the development and implementation of the SVOG process about what are the challenges that the sector might face and how might we move forward to gather information to see how the field is responding, because if we know anything, what was before is different now. In this administration of the survey, we had about 203 respondents. We're happy with that number. We hope that all those of you who are listening or might listen to the recording have responded. If you haven't, you certainly can participate. In the next surveys, interviews will go off broadly. Invitations will go off broadly as we move forward. The good news about our sample is we had a broad geographic representation. All parts of the country were well representative. About half of our respondents were either artists, managers, or agents. About 20%, or almost 1 in 5, were individual artists, and a third were producing organizations or companies. We also had a really good distribution of different kinds of genres. And we've looked at these genres and grouped them together to see if we could discover any differences that happened by type. So we have a group of music and dance activity, theater, film, and spoken word, festivals and events, and then others as might be accommodated. Okay. So I'm going to ask Christian to dive into a little bit of the data, and I'll come back and talk to you a little bit about some health and safety implications.
Thanks, Stephen. So I want to talk a little bit. We want to talk about a sense of what activity looks like, demand looks like, and in order to give some context to that, we want to bring in some of the data from another study that we have been involved in here over the last couple of years, but also very recently, called Audience Outlook Monitor. Gives us a sense of what the perspective of audiences is in this very interesting time in the sector. Right now, this is the most up-to-date data that we have for mid-March of 2022. We're seeing a promising outlook when it comes to the level of comfort that that audiences are expressing around attending venues, being outdoors and indoors, has increased over time here. And that's a really great outlook for us and good context for many of our artists, as well as our venues and presenters that are part of the study. Also, an interesting trend we've been seeing among audiences is the idea that concerns around COVID in the last couple of months have certainly dropped, whereas we've seen an increase in barriers to attendance that include the type of program that they might be interested in. They haven't been able to find programs that they're interested in increasing numbers, as well as concerns around budget, personal household budget and discretionary income. Those are interesting trends that we're going to continue to watch here when it comes to how performers and venues are performing in terms of sales and those sort of things.
And I think, Christian, just to add a little bit on this, right, where people are changing their behaviors, right? They're going from not wondering what was going on to wondering what's going on. There's also a question about supply, and we're going to see a little bit of that in the responses to this survey.
Absolutely. And so those are intimately linked for sure, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. When we asked this set of artists and agents, the artists that agents represent, as well as the managers, what the activity looks like at the moment, we got a little bit of a snapshot here, and we understand that about 3/4 of folks are already hosting full capacity performances, whether that's inside, outside, and that's quite a promising outlook. That doesn't mean that the volume is up, but that does mean that they report that they are able to host full capacity performances in large number, which is great. In terms of thinking about a full schedule of in-person activity, a little bit of a different outlook. You've got about 40% that are currently offering what they consider to be a full schedule of activity relative to pre-pandemic. Whereas there is another third that are anticipating returning to that full schedule of activity by the fall. There are some significant differences in the southern region that we wanted to call out here as well. Anticipation that artists in the southern region, are expecting to return to full levels of in-person activity much sooner than other regions across the country. In terms of the volume of activity, and the way that we understand this is the number of activities that are occurring in a given month or a given season. In this case, we examined an average monthly activity relative to pre-pandemic. We see a more significant reduction in the volume of activity that occurred in recent months relative to what the venues and presenters reported in our last iteration of the survey, which is an interesting observation. It leads us to a question of why that might be happening, and we certainly want to be exploring some of those drivers as we look forward. Why are venues and presenters experiencing less of a reduction than the artists and the agents are?
And if I can just jump in here, Christian, for a second, I think that some of this might be technical. The people who are responding to our surveys, where these may be smaller companies, individual artists, practitioners, versus larger venues and performing arts centers. So we're going to explore all that, but we would certainly love if you want to put something in the Q&A that might help us understand why this is different, because this is fairly different. It's close to a 15% reduction, if you will, in the return to prior activity. Artists and companies being significantly less active than venues, and anecdotes that we hear suggest to us that this may have to do with a behavior shift. So we would really love your input to understand that.
Definitely. Another really important thing that we'd like to understand, and we heard from many of the constituent groups and those that are responding to the survey, is the idea of rescheduled shows from cancellations and postponements in 2020 and 2021. Overall, we see about half of the activity, nearly half of the activity in the last 30 days that was reported was from rescheduled shows that were canceled or postponed in 2020 or 2021. Really interesting there. And that represents about half of respondents who indicate that they have rescheduled some activity in the last 30 days. Those are the artists or the agents who represent artists reporting on behalf of the artists. We want to turn a little bit here to some of the drivers around challenges in returning. We asked artists, we asked companies, we asked agents who represent their clients why perhaps some of their clients who are not engaging in any activity right now, why is that the case? And certainly Omicron and other virus concerns continue to linger. But what's interesting is that we see, and again, this is another point of inquiry, feel free to put a comment or a question in the chat or the Q&A. But we see that it seems like there is quite a bit of other challenges around repriming activity, bringing activity back into play, which we might have anticipated and we've been talking about for some time across the field here. Communication lines between venues and presenters and the artists who are providing the content. Perhaps there's some opportunity there. We see, ramp up of different live shows, taking time to get presentations back up to speed. The startup costs that are involved in starting production are very high for some. And so perhaps these are interesting factors to explore and try to mitigate as much as possible as we consider integrating the field a little bit more. Do you have anything to add here, Stephen?
No, not really. I think that it's a really good just point to reemphasize, I think, Christian, what you said. We know that for many organizations during the pandemic, there was tons of creative activity and that there was a lot of thinking and work happening, but maybe not on the scale of ready for market. We do know that this constant shuffling of the calendar is a really, really difficult thing to manage and will smooth over time. That's one of the reasons for this being a longitudinal study. So we can see how that changes. But anecdotal input feedback to us from survey participants is always helpful in this area.
Definitely. We also wanted to understand touring as distinct from anything else. We called out a question in terms of the resumption of touring activity and the future of touring activity and booking tours, as well as run-out performances, which we'll talk about in just a minute here. But we do see that about half of artists report, and agents on behalf of their artists report, that they have resumed some sort of touring. Oftentimes it is quite reduced activity on tour, routed tours relative to pre-pandemic activity, obviously, but it is promising to see that there is touring activity that's occurring, and there's touring activity that's occurring nationwide as well, which is interesting.
Right, and important, Christian, to emphasize that 3 in 5 of our respondents said that their activity is less than half of what it was in 2019. So this is another one of those data points that reinforces a slow repriming of the sector on the supply side that matches a part of the audience that is not ready to come back yet, perhaps.
Right, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about that middle stat there, that there's 50% that have resumed touring. Also, when we think about non-routed tours, the run-out performances, those are happening with more frequency. And also the idea that there are artists and agents that are booking routed tours for the future in greater number. And we'll talk a little bit more about the detail there as well here in just a minute. The runouts, which we're defining as a one-off non-routed performance that takes an artist away from home, but it's not a routed tour. So we're seeing that those that are booking runouts right now, 8 in 10 of them are booking runouts, and those that are doing them immediately, and that's an opportunity for them to get out and perform when tours might be a little bit more challenging to coordinate among presenters and venues. But 8 and 10 are doing that, which is great. That said, when we think about tour activity, and we'll turn a little bit more to this, we see that there is a struggle to prime the pipe, and this is very much in tandem with some of the other verbatim comments that we've seen. There's this idea that presenters might be faced with a number of challenges that are preventing them from engaging with a volume of artists. That artists, interestingly, are accepting fees that are well below what they might command pre-pandemic, just out of desperation or a sense that there is a opportunity for work and they're trying to seize it. And just also a general sense among many artists that they're at the whim of other cogs in the wheel of the sector.
Christian, I'd like to just jump in here and respond to Jeff's question, and at the same time talk a little bit about understanding more of who's answering what. So we don't have a really complete connection between the presenter and venue survey and the artist survey. I think one of the things that we will be asking next time is a little more information about how to make that. But Jeff, we are certainly hearing from major presenters, particularly those that lean to the earned revenue or commercial side of the world, large scale music, Broadway, those kinds of things, that activity has resumed with force. For smaller market specific presenters and in the university marketplace, which has been slower to reopen to the public, and a place where an awful lot of more modest scale work takes place, that they're slower to restart. So there's two things that it feels to us are happening at once. There's a lot of stuff that got rescheduled that has filled up the calendar in these first months of reopening. It's sort of latent supply is getting used up, and folks are planning for their new seasons, their 22-23 seasons, with original activity. And at the same time, we have reinforcing data from our colleagues at Google, who have tell us that popular stuff is selling really, really strongly, name brand titles, and more traditional titles are struggling.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Awesome. So, and we also wanted to reiterate our understanding of how artists and agents fared in terms of relief funding coming out of the pandemic here. Pretty interesting differences that we'd like to call out as well. As we understand it, we see that artists are more frequently receiving private money, government money, and meanwhile agencies, perhaps they have a connection with a venue or they operate a venue in some capacity, but they were more likely to receive SVOG money across the board here. So that said, the majority, or at least half across the board of this survey received paycheck protection funding in support of their issues coming out of the pandemic. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Stephen to talk a little bit more about health and safety protocols and what's going on and what the status is in terms of that when it comes to artists.
Thanks, Christian, and I would encourage Jenny or anybody else on the panel, if my background noise is overwhelming, I'll pass this back to you. But we've been checking audience expectations around health and safety guidelines and mandates actually since March of 2020. We've certainly seen the same kind of curves that you can read on your New York Times daily chart for the country or your state. In our most recent survey in February, we saw a 1/3 reduction in expectations that mask mandates are still necessary in large assembly facilities indoors. You can see it varies across the country based on different geographies. There's, of course, civic or local requirements, artist desires, union desires, for example, in the case of equity, that affect what venues actually have to do. But this is audience perception. And it tracks absolutely with how the virus data moves. In terms of readiness to attend, the news here we think is quite encouraging. We saw in our survey that about 8 in 10 folks are ready to attend. As of mid-March, this varies a little bit geography by geography, and there's a significant distinction between ready to attend under any conditions and those who are more likely to attend if there is a vaccinated only policy for attendance in the building. And you can see that that number is highest in the Northeast and lowest in the Midwest. It's about 50% different. And that just will guide a lot of individual venues and also how they're working with artists and artist representatives as they go forward. So to bring it all together a little bit more, we asked artists, agents, and producers about mask mandates, and here you can see the number is different. It's about 2/3 requiring some kind of mask requirement, about 50% requiring proof of vaccination, versus only 49% of audiences who still believe that 46%, I'm sorry, that still believe that's necessary. I think I covered this slide already. I might have said this data without looking at the slide, but higher numbers in the Northeast and the West. The coasts have been higher consistently all throughout the pandemic in their health and safety requirements. So, so where are we at this moment in time? The outlook is getting better and better with each passing month, provided that a new variant doesn't surface that changes our behaviors or our requirements. We're pretty confident that audiences are getting more confident. What's interesting is that we think we could be close to capping out at about 80 or 85% of our historical audience ready to return, and about 15% whose behaviors may have changed. Some of it may be health and safety related, some of it may be practice or behavior related, and some of it may be interest. One of the things we're talking about going forward is how to talk to audiences who weren't our historical audiences and see where they may fit in the system as we go forward. It's fairly clear by this fall that most venues, most artists, most agents and managers will be pushing what was a traditional full slate of activity forward. And hopefully we will see a good response from audiences and consumers. And then finally, I think Christian and I feel it's really important to emphasize, we have a lot of data that say the people who attend arts and cultural events want to know what's going on. They want to know how we're thinking about their health and safety. They want to know about how we make decisions about whether a show goes on or might have to get canceled. So we really encourage the artist, manager, and agent population to engage very closely with your presenters and venues, to work with them to have a really solid communications plan. We can actually see that it impacts attendance and readiness to attend. So with that, I want to take a deep breath. We have 3 questions that we thought we might throw out there as prompts, but we can take anything anybody wants in the Q&A and go from there. Christian, I'm going to let you take the lead here because of my background noise.
Certainly. So everybody can see that we've posed a number of questions. Obviously, there must be several more that everybody has, but we thought it would be interesting to call out any perspective that anybody might be able to offer into the chat on whether your health and safety protocols, if you're an artist or an agent who represents artists, might be different from venues. And if so, do you have any thoughts on why? And then subsequent to that, what factors are actually determining whether you as an artist or your artists as an agent or a manager are putting health and safety protocols in place? What are some of the factors that are important there? And then finally, we want to call this question as well of perhaps there are ways or suggestions or thoughts or further questions around how communication might be improved and continue to grow between presenters, venues, and artists, especially as we are hopefully exiting the bulk of the pandemic here. So please feel free to offer up anything into the chat or a question into the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you and talk a little bit more about this.
Okay, while folks are thinking about that, Willie, let me just talk a little bit about next steps. Early, actually another week or so this month, the next venue and presenters survey will be issued. About this time a month from now, round 2 of the artist managers and agents survey will be issued. We do want to remind you that we're very interested in tracking this data in a longitudinal way, which means consistent responses are important. Those of you that indicated you would opt in, and those of you that do respond to all 4 of our surveys, together with APAP, will be eligible to participate in a drawing, and we'll go forward from there. Jenny, I actually thank you for the correction. Actually, the venue and presenter survey is open right now, right, Christian? As of yesterday, I believe.
Correct. Wednesday.
I've been in an airport for 2 weeks. I feel like I've been caught in a time warp. Are there any questions, or Lisa or Jenny, anything that you'd like to emphasize?
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Right, and I think with that, we'll wrap up for today. The replay will be available as Jenny posted in the Jenny, help me where it is, in the Spotlight newsletter. For members, we really appreciate your participation. Encourage you to continue, encourage you to engage your colleagues. This work is really, really important as we move forward to a reopening that engages our whole communities. And we thank you for being here with us today. Mel and Jesse, thank you both for your interpretation today. We appreciate it. And I'll let Willie sign off.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending today. We do have a post-session survey for you to fill out as we move forward and evaluate all of our programmatic efforts. We would appreciate you taking a minute to fill it out. You will also be receiving the link for that survey within the next day or so. The video replay will also be sent out next week. Thank you guys so much.